half and half. He was half Sioux, half Arikara. And one of the childhood friends that teased him the most was eventual Sioux Chief Gall. So he knew Gall. Gall had chastised him quite a bit as a child, teased him, made fun of him, picked on him. So Bloody Knife knew Gall as a child. And when he was growing up, half Arikara and half Sioux in the Sioux home life, Sioux family, his home life was horrible. So why do you think he joined Custer and helped Custer?
To kill Gall.
He hated the Sioux and Gall. That's why he became Custer's scout in the first place. So it is believed he joined Custer to fight the Sioux, who he hated with a passion because of how he was treated when he was a small child.
If he was with the Arikara and said, do you think he would have hated them just as much?
No, I think he probably would have been a little different life, but there's a reason why he wasn't. More than likely he was from a Sioux mother and a Arikara dad, is my guess. And you know how that goes, he went with his mom. Okay. Now, he was also mutilated, and they cut off his head, and it was paraded around the Sioux camp after the dust cleared in the battles. So during the mutilization process, Bloody Knife's head was severed, and it was paraded around the Sioux camp. Now there's two stories of how he was paraded, according to Indian legend or Indian discovery. Okay? The first one was that his head was cut off and put on the end of a stick, and it was paraded through the Sioux camp after the battle. The second story is that two young girls, after his head was cut off, each took one of his braids in each hand and were swinging his head around between them, almost like you were jumping rope through the Sioux camp. So we don't know for sure, but we do know his head was paraded through the Sioux camp, either on a stick that was paraded through, or the story states that there were two young Indian girls, each with one of his braids in each hand, that were basically swinging it and running through the camp. But anyway, not a good situation. Now, he's buried somewhere. He was buried June 27 by Colonel Gibbon's men in the valley. Nobody knows where, nobody's found the body. But they do, you know, a headless Native American, they might have guessed, I don't know. Now, later, they found evidence that he was buried there, and now there is a marker that shows Bloody Knife's tombstone, so to speak. And all the markers, remember, nobody's under the markers at Custer Battlefield. But anyway, there's at least a marker up now, just recently put up, that signified his fall.
Where was it in?
He was just buried in the valley somewhere on June 27th. Gibbons, June 27th, yeah. 2 days later. Remember I told you they came in and buried all the dead kind of where they were? Well, Bloody Knife was buried somewhere in the valley, nobody really knows where. Okay? Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about in this test material is a very special horse. And then I'm going to tell you the story I'm going to tell you about this whole thing with the Reno Valley and Jason Pitch. Okay? And it's a pretty good story. A very special horse. This is kind of cool. Okay. And also among the casualties of the Reno retreat was a farrier's horse. Now I know you know this horse. What's a farrier?
It's a guy who shoes horses.
It's a guy that shoes horses. So the 7th Cavalry had a farrier with them, a guy that shoed the horses. So one of the casualties of this Reno charge and retreat was a farrier's horse. And he belonged to another casualty of the Valley fight, John Sievertson, who's on your ID sheet. You need to know him. John Sievertson. So John Sievertson, a farrier, and his horse were both casualties of the Reno Valley fight. Now remember I told you about this dig? And I'll tell you more about the Jason Pitch dig and all that. In the late 1990s, this horse was found under the ground in the dirt, completely intact. Honest to God, completely intact. Not a bone missing. Okay? And it was exhumed, and it had the saddle on it, the bridle, the saddlebags, and farrier tools in the bags underneath the ground. I'm not kidding you. It's the coolest thing ever. I had these farrier tools in my hands.
With the ring on.
When the ring. I'm just telling you, it was incredible. Now there's a story behind this I'm going to tell you when we get done lecturing because it's a hell of a story. Now, how do we know that John Severson, how do we even know this was his horse? Because the farrier tools had JS engraved on them. So they went through the records to see who the farrier was,
John Smith.
and it was John, there was only one, yeah, there was only one farrier on the roll, and it was John Severson. So this horse belonged to John Severson. Now, this complete skeleton was assembled, and it's owned by a guy by the name of Glenn Swanson. And there's a story behind Glenn Swanson I'm going to tell you. He's a movie producer from California. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, why does he own the skeleton? That's the sad story.
He makes Western movies.
Yes. Okay, now, I want to tell you this story. I'll just give you, now, I'm going to give you, how many are not going to be here tomorrow? Okay, tomorrow I'm going to give you a copy of a poem that was written about John Severson's horse, and it was written by Jeff Strebe. And I'm going to read it to the kids tomorrow. I'll get you guys a copy, okay? And I'm going to record this. You don't need to memorize it, but it is an incredible poem that a guy wrote based on his experience with Steve Adelson, who's the guy that's going to go with us on this trip. Based on his experience of Steve taking him and telling him this story, this guy was so overwhelmed by this story and so taken back by the history that he went and wrote a poem. This guy was not even a poet, and he wrote the most awesome poem, and we're going to read it tomorrow. But I want to tell you this story before we quit today. So we're done taking notes, and I want you to listen to this story because it's a really interesting deal. All right. Picture this in your mind. You listen or you talk? Okay. There are two different battles here, which a lot of people don't know when you talk about the Battle of Little Bighorn. You have Custer's and Reno and Benteen's battalions involved. Benteen is on the left flank, and he's still coming. Reno has already charged, and he's up on the high bluffs protecting himself, and Custer's going to make another move. And it's, you know his fate from history. The land that Custer's killed on is government land. Okay? The land that Reno attacks and has his soldiers killed on is private land, which belonged at that time to the Pitch family that lived in Crow Agency. Okay?